My talk today is about cycles and t-shirts, specifically about 3 cycles and 4 t-shirts. The first cycle that I will talk about today is that of children's mental illnesses. Children are happy, are carefree, and that's how we think of our own childhood and the childhood of those around us. And yet, children's mental illnesses are real, are common, and are treatable conditions. Let me start with the real part. Anxiety disorders, addiction, autism. Those are just 3 within the letter A. And I could continue through the 32 letters of the alphabet telling you the enormous amount and diversity of these disorders, the toll that they take on children and their families. They are quite real, and they have a lifelong impact. They are common. Again, we tend to think of the part of the rainbow when we think of childhood, of sunny days, of carefree, wonderful days. And yet we know that approximately 1 in 5 children in New Haven, in America, and across the world have some form of a serious and impairing mental illness. 1 in 5. These are our children. These are the children in our communities. So these are not rare conditions, even though many times they're unspoken. They're not visible, but they're there. They're very palpable. Now, I'm not here to talk about the rainy day and rain on your parade. This is a day of celebration and excitement. So I'm here to talk also about the fact that they're not only real and they're common, but indeed they're treatable. There's a lot that we can do for these conditions. And what we have in our toolkit today as mental health professionals is really extraordinary. I personally have had the privilege of dedicating my professional career to diagnosing, treating these conditions, and to helping individuals and their families affected by them. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. Before I do so, I've already covered the first cycle, and that's the cycle of children's mental illnesses. Now, let me tell you a little bit about myself. As I mentioned, I am a child and adolescent psychiatrist. I was born and raised in Mexico, where I went to medical school, and I have been privileged in my training and education. After university in Mexico, I had postgraduate training in Miami, at Harvard, and then 20 years ago, I came for my first and only job out of training here at Yale. I've been very fortunate. Yale has been a wonderful community. And as I have grown professionally, my day job, I direct an inpatient unit for some of the most ill children, the proverbial tip of the iceberg when we think about the severity of these disorders. Not only have I been able to do this as a clinician, taking care of individual children and families, but my blessings have been many. My cup virtually veritably runneth over. I have been able to be the editor of a leading journal. I have edited textbooks, both in English and in Spanish. I have been able to be involved at the American level, at the international level, traveling the world to help children and their families with mental illness. By the time that I was 45, I had an endowed chair. I was a full professor at this magnificent institution. By the age of 45, I had arrived. I was here. My life was full. I was counting my many blessings. What could possibly be wrong? And yet, there was something. There was something that I couldn't put my finger on. But I found out at that time that my t-shirts didn't fit. And these are the first 2 t-shirts that I mentioned. I knew that something was not right because of my t-shirts. Now, in some sense, I am talking about actual t-shirts, but more importantly, I'm talking about metaphorical t-shirts. You see, as an academic in a medical school at this great university, I was commonly asked, what t-shirt do you wear? Now, that question came from well-meaning friends and colleagues who were trying to say, what is the focus of your career? What are you specializing in? Yes, we know that you're a child psychiatrist. Fill in here, engineer, architect, musician. you're a child psychiatrist, but what is your specialty? And what they meant by that is one of two t-shirts. What is your focus? What is the what that you are studying? Or what is the how? What is the method through which you're studying it? And you see, these t-shirts didn't fit right. First of all, because I liked everything. And when you like everything, you can't focus on something narrow. And academics force you in some way to focus on something, and that didn't fit right. So throughout my career, I've worn many an ill-fitting t-shirt, trying this diagnosis and that diagnosis, this condition, that condition, didn't feel right. Similarly, that of a method of how you do that. How do you approach a condition? I tried things like crunching big data sets. I dabbled in brain imaging, in genetics, in some of the many medical wonderful tools that we have at our disposition today to treat these illnesses that I mentioned. We don't just use medication and talk therapy, the two main things in our toolkit, but we also have the power of the genome, of brain imaging, of big data, artificial intelligence. I couldn't bring any one of those. I like them all. And of course, this made me feel like a dilettante, like a wannabe, like an imposter. I found out that I was in good company, and I wasn't the only person feeling imposter syndrome at this Augusta University. It was a pretty common condition. And here I was, diagnostician that I am. After all, I'm a doctor making diagnoses, and I felt that I had arrived at the diagnosis. My t-shirts do not fit. I was in an uncharted part of my life, indeed. I was lost. I couldn't find the coordinates in my career, those coordinates that put the what and the how, the focus and the method. And I was really lost, uncharted. That was my diagnosis. However, that didn't quite tell all the story, because having figured that out and come to peace with it, being comfortable with that, there was still something wrong. There was still something ill-fitting. And I realized that that sense of uncharted was not only a geographic being lost, but it was a physical being at unease. The symptoms that I identified, first of all, were these reverberating loops of thinking that went nowhere, thinking cul-de-sacs. Not particularly grim thoughts, just thoughts that didn't go anywhere and kept on repeating themselves. Another symptom is that I couldn't clear my mind. I couldn't just think of nothing and get into that proverbial Zen quiet space. I couldn't do it. And the third symptom was an unease that then became an ache, that became a pain. It was somewhere around here. It was somewhere on my chest. It was somewhere on my abdomen. I didn't know what it was. But it was with me day in and day out. Things started to feel and move slowly. And I didn't know what was going on. Now, in some ways, I should have been able to diagnose this right away, not only because my professional career is dedicated to diagnosing these very conditions, not only because I have lectured and talked about these conditions, but because these conditions are ripe in my own family, and indeed in myself, they had been years before. My family tree lights up with people dealing with these conditions, and I recognized that many years ago I had as well. But it took me more than a year to actually recognize these symptoms and to put them together. I was depressed. I had depression. And I hadn't been able to diagnose it. From the time that I made that diagnosis till the time that I picked up the phone to get treatment was another interminable time. And picking up that phone to make that first call, was one of the hardest things that I've ever done. But I did. And I'm happy to tell you that here I am, the happy recipient of the very pills that I prescribe, the happy recipient of the talk therapy that I give, and I'm fully recovered, and I'm happy, and I'm doing well, and depression is way back in the rearview mirror of my life, and it's a wonderful thing. So that's a second cycle, the cycle of my own mental illness, the cycle of my own depression, the cycle of me. Now, there was a third thing that helped me in addition to medication and talk therapy, and that was a bike, a cycle. Before I tell you that, let me go back in time a little bit. I was born in Mexico City, as I mentioned. I was born in 1966, and by 1970s, you can see the swinging Columbia. This was a bicycle. And for those of you who are not familiar, that is a banana seat. That's how I learned to ride a bike, in a banana seat. And this next photograph is not of me personally, but by the high fashion statement of the color, you can see that it could have been me. 1970s vintage, bell bottoms. This was a great time to be alive, and this was a great banana seat to ride. Now, I remember viscerally the first time that I got this bicycle, my first bike without little wheels. And I remember my father, who was not particularly athletic. I don't know that he knew how to ride a bicycle, but he gave me this gift. And I was so excited, and I remember getting onto that banana seat, and my father pushing me, and my saying, Papi, don't let me go, don't let me go, I can do this, I can do this. And as I turned around, guess what? He had let me go. And I was moving, I was flying, and that sense of independence, of being on two wheels, untethered, wonderful. It's one of the strongest memories that I have of my childhood, that sense of independence. I didn't become a great cyclist. In fact, it took almost 40 years till I rode a bicycle again. But I did. And this is the third cycle. I've talked about the cycle of mental illness in children, about the cycle of my own mental health. And this was a third cycle. In fact, it was about breaking the cycle. I tried to find a way of breaking those two cycles for children, for myself, through this cycle. It was all through serendipity. A friend of mine, Michael, had bought himself a big bike as part of his midlife crisis, and he said, come, let's go. I hadn't ridden a bike in 40 years, but as soon as I got there, I felt that I was a 7-year-old boy in Mexico City riding again. I was hooked. I was in love. And that was a great part of what helped me to get out of this cycle of my own depression. And I would say that it's the strongest part that keeps me afloat these days. Now, I wanted to put all of this together, and I didn't know how to do it, but I thought that there was a way. And this leads to the third shirt. T-shirts are something that you wear underneath, but a jersey is something that you put out, that you fill, something that tells a bit of your affiliation to a team. And here we move from a T-shirt to a jersey. Because you see, we tell our young people to focus on what it is that you want to learn, what technique, the what and the how. What we don't tell them, what hadn't been told to me, but what I came to learn is that it's not only about that you want to do, but that if you open your ears, you will hear the calling of your team. You will listen and find that there's something to be given. Now, the team that I'm talking about here was a team of child psychiatry, children's mental health, but it was also very concretely Team USA. See, I'm originally from Mexico, but I became a naturalized citizen. I love this country, and I wanted to embrace this country and what it had given back to me. And as I listened and I listened, I knew that there was a big need out there, a need to give back to children, a need for me to give back to my country, to understand it. And this is the effort through which I put it together. Over the span of 2.5 months, I covered 5,200 miles. I just turned 52, so that seemed to be fortuitous, about 100 miles a day. I climbed over 220,000 feet of vertical elevation, and I'm happy to tell you that we raised over $250,000, so about $1 per foot, money that will go to children's mental illness. These are some of the statistics of this wonderful bike ride through which I got to know this wonderful land, through which I was able to give back. And I guess that as I think of that third jersey, I think of this iconic photograph. Iconic as part of my trip. Here I am at the country's first national monument. That's the Devil's Tower monument that Theodore Roosevelt inaugurated as the first national monument. So it certainly is fitting for my USA jersey to be in this beautiful, special place. But I'm also wearing my Yale jersey, and I feel very proud to be part of this community. So I had heard some calling from Yale, from the US, from child psychiatry. That was wonderful. This photograph in some ways is iconic to me because my children tell me, "Papi, you never smile showing your teeth. In fact, you're a very bad smiler. You might be a good child psychiatrist, but you don't know how to smile. People smile showing their teeth, and yet you smile like this. That's not a real smile." But when we look at the photographs of your trip across the country, there's permagrin all over you, such as here, and that is wonderful. Now, it's great to be able to wear this jersey, this third jersey. There were the first two T-shirts. There's the team jersey of the where and the whom are going to be the people you surround yourself with. And yet there's a fourth and final jersey because there's something wrong with this. At the end of the day, this jersey existed before I came along. Yale University existed before I came along, and that Yale jersey certainly was around. So I would say in closing that as you think of your own career and you think of your what is your focus, your how you're going to do it, your where and whom is going to be your team, those are the three T-shirts that you need to figure out. But there's a fourth one. And it's a fourth one that we're not told much about. And of course, that's the T-shirt or the jersey that doesn't yet exist. It's the jersey, it's a T-shirt that you will create for your own self. I was very fortunate to be able to put this one in, literally, to create a shirt of my own. I'll break the cycle. That was wonderful. This is not your jersey. This is probably not my last jersey, but it's something that I created. And I invite you all to think of that. Now, if you feel uncharted and lost and you don't know how to do it, I would give you two prescriptions. First, try to find out where your skill set is and intersect it with service. And that is probably a good place. It certainly was for me, the skill set of child psychiatry and the skill set of service, of giving back to my community. Or in the words of the Christian theologian Christoph Bauer, think about your deep gladness, the deep gladness that I had in my banana seed, for example, and the deep hunger out there in the world. Try to intersect that deep gladness with that deep hunger, and that is where your vocation lies. And there, I would suggest, is where your own very T-shirt may be. Thank you very much.